parenting. So let's open up Maya, and we've just got, again, some simple objects here. This is 10 begin. We've got a sphere, cube, and a cone. Let's open up the outliner and kind of put it off to the side, and you can see those objects here. If I select each object in the outliner, you can see it's selected in the viewport. Now right now, each object has its own sort of center pivot, and I can move each one of those objects around, and you can see that nothing else is affected. But if we want certain objects to be able to move together, we can create different kinds of connections or relationships between those objects. So for instance, if every time I wanted the cube to move, I wanted the sphere to follow along as if it's sitting on top of the cube or it's connected somehow. Well, we can parent the sphere to the cube. So we want the cube to be the parent and the sphere to be the child, because the child will move with the parent. So if we select the sphere, and then I'm going to control or shift click on the cube and hit the P key, now you can see that all I'm seeing in the outliner is the cube. But we do have this little plus sign, so if I open that up, you can see that now the sphere is parented underneath the cube. So if I select the child or the sphere, I can move it around no problem. But if I select the cube, I'm now selecting the cube and everything that's parented under the cube. So I can move everything around, I can rotate it. You can see it's using the cube's pivot as that spot to rotate or to translate. And so now the sphere is parented underneath the cube. But again, you could move the children by themselves, but if you move the parent, it moves all of the children with it. Okay, we could do the same thing here. We could grab the cone, and I could middle mouse drag it in the outliner underneath the cube, and it does the same thing as hitting the P key. So now if I take the cube and move it around, it's moving everything. Or if I rotate it, it's moving everything around that way. Okay, but again, if I select one of the children, those work independently. If I want to unparent something, I can click on both of these, hit Shift P, and that'll drop them out of the hierarchy, so now everything is separate again. Now what if I want to make my own sort of overall parent for every object or for a group of objects, and not necessarily have one particular object that is a parent of other objects? Well, what we can do is create a group. So if I want to group, let's say, again, I want to group both of these together, but I don't want to have one be the parent and one be the child. We'll select both of these objects and hit Control G to group those together. Now you can see I've created a new group called Group 1 with a different icon. If we open that up, you can see both objects underneath at the same level. I can rename this group by double-clicking. Just call it Temp Group. And by default, the pivot of the new group is going to go right to the origin. So, you know, if I had objects that were off to the side, let's maybe duplicate this over here. So neither one of these objects are at the origin here at the 0, 0, 0 space, but if I selected both of them and hit Control G, the pivot goes back to that spot. Okay, so it doesn't go to either one of these, it doesn't go to the middle, it goes back to this spot, which in some cases is actually very useful. All right, now again, if I wanted to ever drop this out of the hierarchy, I could middle mouse drag it down until I get this little dotted line down here, and or between here. There we go. That's kind of in the inside there. There it is, outside of the group. Or I can hit Shift P again to pull that out. Now we have an empty group, which, you know, is just kind of a null object. We could drag stuff inside of it again if we wanted to. You can see the group pivot doesn't change. If you want to move a pivot of anything, even the group, you can hit Insert and move the pivot. There we go. Or you can also hold down the D key to do that as well, and that can change the pivot. So now it's pivoting from that new spot. So keep that in mind as well. So you can not only parent things to one another, so one object to another object, but you can also create an overall group that holds a bunch of different objects at the same level. Now we can start to nest these groups together. So for instance, we have a group here with our cones in it. Okay, so here's a group with our cones, and we want this group to be underneath this, so we can drag it, the whole thing, under here. So now we're starting to nest things together. So if we select this overall group, we can move it around. But if we select this group 1, we can move it or rotate it independently as this one's moving as well. So we can start to create these nested relationships with our objects. You can also, if you want to, select your group, and we can go to edit. You can see group is the function down here. You can also ungroup it as well. All right, so that's a look at parent-child relationships and also grouping and kind of setting up a hierarchy, which is, you can kind of see here in our outliner. It's a good way to keep our scene organized, and also, if you're going to be manipulating objects as groups of objects, this is a good way to go about that, just making sure everything is moving along with the other pieces that you really want to move together. Okay, so the next thing we'll talk about is the hotbox. So a way to access some tools in Maya very, very quickly. So we'll talk about some of the things that we can do with that hotbox before we move on to a little bit of scripting and working with shelves. And I believe then we're going to be actually starting on the modeling. So we'll get to that in the next